we can start by defining ethics as a group.
When I think of my definition, it's, I don't know, I guess like a moral compass, like just knowing, being able to tell the right from wrong and choosing to do right from wrong. And
the text offers kind of a short definition. The text put it as standards for moral conduct, judgments as to whether human behavior is right or wrong. If you guys want to use that as a jumping off point.
Yeah, but I think ethics is, I agree with Catherine, it's a moral thing. But I think people use their personal judgment often, It's not like, okay, I'm being ethical because ethics says that I have to open the door for people. It's what they think is ethical. Do they think it's ethical to open the door for people or no?
Yeah, I think everybody has their different set of ethical rules. So I really think everybody's is different from right and wrong, and I think that's what makes cultures what they are. Because if they didn't have a moral compass, it would just be, there would be no reason for doing anything. Because people always do things whether they believe it's right or wrong.
So is it safe? Okay, go ahead.
I just saying it really does base on also like the situation. I know the textbook highlighted the fact that some people choose to not act on some certain ethical behavior in the hopes of, not making fun of the person for their physical characteristics and such. I think that's what bases what human nature defines as how they act personally with their ethics.
I was the 4 components of ethical behavior, moral sensitivity, moral judgment, motivation. It kind of made me feel that, like in the news, for example, like it made me think of like the elections, and it's kind of like a battle for ethical leadership being, because they're always, accusing each other at one time or another of lacking one of those 4 components, whether it be, judgment or sensitivity.
Yeah, I think it's really hard, like individual ethics are one thing and sort of like public or organizational ethics are a lot different. And
yeah, they have like different,
or more about like a structure and a system that supports and promotes like consistent behavior that the organization has decided is ethical, that has like real flow through, I guess. Like whenever we're talking about the election, people like align their ethics with candidates, but then in a practical matter, like how are they living their ethical values? Or are they just saying ethics? Or like there's a lot of, and I know like I guess after debates it's always fact checking and stuff, but a lot of it, and especially organizationally or in larger organizations, it's not about just like don't do something wrong. It's about like here's a set of standards and guidelines that will enable you to remain ethical in sort of complex and challenging situations. Above that, like how can you orient an organization to do more than just like right or wrong and have like more, and the text talks about having something more than just like a bottom line value.
Right. And I think that's a good segue, especially it being such a weird day to have a conversation about ethics, given this debate. But that's a really nice transition into the second part of our focus today, which is, how do ethics shape leadership? And be that within an organization or be that within a political body. So any thoughts on that, how ethics shape leadership?
Yeah, and like I said, like I think there's a baseline of ethics and how it shapes leaderships by just like, let's answer all these simple questions and like have those settled, and then we can focus on like a larger mission or larger values, and how can you like shape your organization, how can you use your leadership to like promote something more than like a base level ethics, just like Arizona State's new university. It's more than just like normal ethics, it's how can we like expand our footprint and bring like real change to the world.
This part of the question got me thinking a little bit about some stuff further down in the chapter regarding Kant's categorical imperative versus utilitarianism. So I think that's a really great example of how your ethics and your use of ethics will shape your leadership. So a lot of times you have, or leaders of companies who their approach to ethics might typically follow utilitarianism, right? Meaning I have to make decisions that do the most good for the most of my shareholders, and that's what makes it ethical. Does that make sense? As opposed to maybe, a humanitarian who looks with the categorical imperative. A humanitarian movement might say, we have to act in a completely altruistic way all the time. And that's their leadership, the leader of that movement views ethics differently. So there's two very different approaches to their leadership style based off of their ethical perspective.
Right. They're both, I agree. I don't know if this is where you're going, but they're both, ethical, but they're kind of opposite, but they're still both kind of moral. So I thought that was really interesting as well, the difference between the two. So yeah, that kind of goes into what we were saying, how ethics is, determined by the person. And even though one person does one thing that's ethical, something completely opposite could still be ethical. It's not that it's unethical, it's just different.
And that, you make a great point, Carrie, and that also highlights actually one of the difficulties of the categorical imperative, which is it's hard to define universal principles by which we can say something is ethical. It's very hard to say. I mean, everyone at the beginning of this conference said, well, ethics is different to everybody. It's very hard to say that there's a universal law, like this decision is ethical. You know how you always hear a question like, so a freight train is driving and it, flying down a track, and it's either going to run over one person, but if you flip a switch, it'll run over 3 people, but those people are criminals or whatever. You get these weird, like, moral questions in your philosophy class. Those kind of base off of where is your ethical foundation. And that's reflected within leadership. So if you have a utilitarian leader, if you have, a boss who is very much about doing what's best for the most shareholders or doing what's best for the most employees, then they will make decisions that they think are ethical, but those decisions might be completely different from something that an altruistic leader might think. So in that way, ethics do shape leadership.
Right. The perspective, the ethical perspective, of altruism, how it was, it's ingrained in human nature to look out for others. I think that was one perspective that I think that was actually a good term to, that you see in everybody. You all have that little need to help someone if they need help. And when somebody doesn't exactly perform that way in a positive manner, they do unethical behavior. For example, the Ford Pinto, and how the gas tank would barely get nudged at one point, and then it would blow up, and in fact influence and hurt the people who actually own those cars. So
Right.
I think altruism was a really good aspect, I think.
Sure. The book likes to hinge on some really surprising examples, and makes note of people like Hitler and Stalin. So, were those people behaving ethically? Was their leadership based from an ethical foundation? Well, to you and I, the answer is typically no. But to them and to their followership, their leadership was based within their ethical code, right? A very nationalistic view that caused a lot of grief and turmoil, but kind of a very dark example of how ethics do shape leadership. Certainly not in an altruistic sense.
Right. If an organization says, you know, they're ethical, they're moral, well, we can't really just take that at face value, because to them they might be ethical and moral, but to us, like you were saying, Andrew, it's not. So I think in order for an organization to say that, they need to define, I guess that's why they have mission statements, to define what being ethical and moral is to them.
Sure, that's a great example. That's a strong example that I didn't even read in the text. And I think that segues us, I think we might already be covering this part, but how ethical behavior is reflected in public leadership. Anybody?
See, I got to thinking about, like Enron and how, every level, like from the high ups to even like the, lower level workers, like the ethics it was terrible all the way through. Everybody was cheating and, doing their own, depending on how much power and what level they were at. And they saw it, coming from their bosses, and it just trickled down. And that was like a massive public example of when it works for a while, I think, but eventually it'll trickle down. I think everything will just fall apart publicly.
Some of the main components of public leadership that we saw in chapter 9 can be easily tied to ethics. So if you're talking about a company that's trying to build its brand, right? And so they have a persuasive campaign. Like, remember the oil spill, the Horizon off of Louisiana, and there's the big scandal with BP, and they had to go back and do this big persuasive campaign, and they were focusing very much on their image, talking about how they were making it right. So what they were doing was they were trying to affect public perception from an ethical perspective, trying to explain that they did have everyone's best interests at heart. So within public leadership and trying to modify the perception and behavior of mass audiences, you sometimes see ethics, or the idea of ethics, being reflected in that sense.
I think companies do those types of campaigns a lot, where they try to show people that they're ethical companies and whatnot, like Starbucks when they did the Black Lives Matter movement. And they tried to get the baristas to write out in cups and discuss race and everything. And then they also did the campaign where they showed that they supported gay rights and all that, and they raised the flag in Seattle to show. And I feel like that has to do with ethics, because they're trying to show that they accept everybody as a company.
Right, or I could softball one to you guys, which came to mind. There are entire campaigns, persuasive campaigns, that can only be based in ethics, where you think about social movements. So you think about certain historical figures who we see as leaders, like, say, Martin Luther King. Well, his entire public leadership career was a reflection of ethics, because it was solely based from an ethical standpoint. It wasn't sales, it wasn't political, it wasn't image based, it was ethical. And I think right there you can see truly public leadership rooted in ethics.